The year is 1960, May the 1st. High above the frigid plains of the Soviet Union, Captain Francis Gary Powers, an American civilian pilot, was alone. 70,000 feet below, a vast, hostile landscape stretched to the horizon, a mosaic of endless forests and industrial cities. Above him, the sky was a deep, impossible indigo, the stars faintly visible even in daylight. Powers wore a full pressure suit, his every breath controlled, every function of his body mediated by the machine around him. He was a speck of humanity in a custom-built marvel, the Lockheed U-2 Dragon Lady, a spy plane designed to fly higher than anything else on Earth. For 4 years, these sleek black angels had dared to pierce the Iron Curtain, soaring with impunity, gathering the secrets of a closed empire. They were the eyes of the free world, flying at an altitude so extreme, so untouchable, that they were considered immune to any Soviet weapon. Powers was on a routine intelligence mission, one of the most critical of the Cold War, charting the military might of America's greatest adversary. He was observing Soviet missile sites, airfields, and strategic installations, painting a picture of reality for President Eisenhower, a picture no one else could see. Suddenly, without warning, the serene solitude of the stratosphere shattered. A blinding flash engulfed the cockpit. The aircraft bucked violently, an explosive concussion throwing Powers against his restraints. His immediate thought was engine failure, a terrifying but familiar U-2 hazard. He fought for control, but the Dragon Lady was no longer obeying him. Her long, delicate wings crumpled. The fuselage began to tear apart. As the aircraft spun wildly, tumbling from the heavens, Powers wrestled with the controls, a primal instinct to survive overriding the years of training. He knew he was in mortal danger. He knew the mission was compromised. He knew he was falling rapidly into enemy territory. What he didn't know was that in those terrifying few seconds, the very fabric of Cold War diplomacy had been ripped apart, and the world was about to hold its breath. To understand the profound impact of Francis Gary Powers' fall from the sky, we must first rewind to the dark, uncertain years that followed the Second World War. The globe had been irrevocably cleaved into two ideological blocks. The capitalist West, led by the United States, and the communist East, dominated by the Soviet Union. A fragile, uneasy peace descended, soon to be known as the Cold War, a conflict waged not with bullets and bombs, but with espionage, propaganda, and the terrifying shadow of nuclear annihilation. For the United States, a critical and paralyzing problem quickly emerged: the Iron Curtain. From the Baltic to the Adriatic, the Soviet Union had sealed itself off from the outside world with an unprecedented level of secrecy. Information about Soviet military capabilities, industrial capacity, and strategic intentions was almost non-existent. Washington was operating in a fog, making crucial strategic decisions based on guesswork and worst-case scenarios. The intelligence vacuum was profoundly dangerous. This lack of reliable data fueled deep anxieties within the American military and political establishment. What was the Soviet Union building? How many long-range bombers did they possess? Were they truly developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, and if so, how many? These questions gave rise to the chilling specter of the bomber gap, and the even more terrifying missile gap. American strategists feared a sudden, devastating Soviet first strike, wiping out their capacity to retaliate. The pressure on President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a former five-star general with a deep understanding of strategic realities, was immense. He was a man who had seen the horrors of war firsthand and was acutely aware of the catastrophic implications of miscalculation in the nuclear age. Eisenhower faced an agonizing strategic dilemma. He desperately needed intelligence to prevent either a surprise attack or an unnecessary arms race based on inflated fears. Yet, any attempt to acquire this intelligence carried immense risks. Conventional reconnaissance aircraft like the B-4-7 Stratojet or its photo reconnaissance variant, the RB-57 Canberra, could fly over Soviet territory, but they were vulnerable. They operated within the range of Soviet air defenses, and several had already been shot down or severely damaged, leading to dangerous international incidents. Eisenhower firmly believed that if he could gain accurate intelligence, he might be able to restrain military spending, calm public fears, and pursue a path of peaceful coexistence. But how could he obtain such intelligence without triggering the very war he sought to avoid? The challenge was monumental. The Soviets had vast airspace, a robust radar network, and an increasingly capable air force. Any plane flying over their territory was essentially an act of war, and if caught, the political consequences could be catastrophic. The need was for an aircraft that could fly so high, so fast that it was utterly beyond the reach of any existing Soviet interceptor or anti-aircraft gun. It seemed like an impossible dream, a technological fantasy born of desperation. Yet, in the shadowy corridors of the Central Intelligence Agency and the clandestine workshops of America's aerospace industry, a solution was beginning to take shape. The answer to Eisenhower's intelligence dilemma would come not from a conventional military project, but from a deeply secretive, high-stakes gamble born out of the minds of an unlikely collection of visionaries. One of these was Edwin Land, the brilliant inventor of the Polaroid camera. Land, a member of Eisenhower's Scientific Advisory Committee, proposed a radical idea: a reconnaissance aircraft capable of flying above 70,000 feet, equipped with advanced cameras that could photograph vast swaths of enemy territory with unprecedented clarity. The CIA, specifically its Deputy Director for Plans, Richard Bissell, embraced the concept with fervor. Bissell, a man known for his sharp intellect and aggressive pursuit of clandestine solutions, understood the urgency. To transform this audacious concept into a tangible machine, the CIA turned to the Lockheed Aircraft Corporation and its legendary Skunk Works division, led by Clarence L. Kelly Johnson. Johnson was a maverick engineer, a titan of aviation, known for his unconventional methods and his ability to push technological boundaries at lightning speed. His team worked out of a heavily guarded facility in Burbank, California, under a cloak of secrecy so profound that many of their own colleagues had no idea what they were doing. The project was initially codenamed Project A-Q-U-A-T-O-N-E and later known as the U-2, a designation so generic it raised no alarms. Johnson's challenge was Herculean: design an aircraft that could operate at altitudes where the air was too thin for conventional engines to function efficiently and too cold for existing lubricants. It needed to be incredibly light, yet strong enough to carry heavy, specialized camera equipment. The U-2's design philosophy was radical. It was essentially a powered glider with long, slender wings optimized for high-altitude lift, giving it an almost ethereal appearance. The engineers stripped away every ounce of non-essential weight, even using bicycle-like outrigger wheels that dropped away after takeoff to be collected and reused. The chosen power plant was the Pratt & Whitney J5, 7-engine, heavily modified to operate in the near vacuum of the stratosphere. Engine flameouts were a constant, terrifying risk. The aircraft was so delicate that taxiing it on the ground required special procedures, and its operational ceiling was so extreme that pilots had to wear full pressure suits, essentially personal spacecraft, to survive. The Skunk Works team delivered the first prototype in less than 9 months, a testament to Johnson's genius and the team's relentless dedication. The development, testing, and initial operations of the U-2 took place in one of the most mysterious and heavily guarded locations in American history, Groom Lake, Nevada, famously known as Area 51. This desolate, remote dry lake bed became the crucible where the U-2 program was forged. Here, pilots, engineers, and technicians worked in utter isolation, pushing the limits of human and machine performance. The early test flights were fraught with danger. Engine flameouts at 70,000 feet were not uncommon, requiring pilots to glide the fragile aircraft down from the stratosphere, restarting the engine at lower altitudes. It was a baptism by fire, but it proved the U-2's incredible capabilities. The secrecy surrounding Area 51 was legendary. Even the existence of the base was officially denied for decades. This intense compartmentalization was vital, not only to protect the revolutionary technology but also to shield the political implications of its mission. The U-2 was not merely a plane, it was the spearhead of a new era of intelligence gathering, a technological gamble with the highest possible stakes. It offered the promise of finally seeing behind the Soviet veil, but at the immense risk of being caught in the act. The world had never seen a spying machine like it, and soon, its silent shadow would be cast over the Soviet Union itself. On July 4th, 1956, America's Independence Day, the first U-2 mission over Soviet territory began. President Eisenhower, after considerable agonizing, had given his reluctant approval. The political risks were immense, but the intelligence imperative was even greater. He famously described the decision as the most distasteful necessity of his presidency. A U-2, designated Project Pilgrim, took off from Wiesbaden, West Germany, piloted by Karl Overstreet. Its destination, Leningrad, Moscow, and the heartland of Soviet military production. The initial flights were a stunning success. The U-2 glided silently, unseen, at altitudes exceeding 70,000 feet, far above the reach of any Soviet interceptor aircraft or anti-aircraft missile of the era. The cameras on board, custom built by Edwin Land's company, captured images with astounding resolution. They revealed military airfields, submarine yards, and troop deployments with a clarity that shocked American intelligence analysts. The raw data that poured in was invaluable. It allowed the United States to finally assess the true extent of the bomber gap and the missile gap. What the U-2 photographs showed was profoundly significant. While the Soviets certainly had a formidable military, the intelligence revealed that the bomber gap was far less severe than initially feared. The terrifying estimates of hundreds of Soviet long-range bombers capable of striking the US mainland were largely exaggerated. This crucial insight allowed Eisenhower to resist calls for massive increases in military spending, saving billions of dollars and preventing a further escalation of the arms race. It was a strategic victory for intelligence, directly influencing national policy. However, the Soviets were not entirely blind. Their primitive ground-based radar systems, while unable to track the U-2 consistently or provide targeting information, did register intermittent blips. Soviet air defense commanders were furious and humiliated. They scrambled fighter jets, notably the MiG-1, 9 and the early Su-9 prototypes, but these aircraft could barely reach 50,000 feet, leaving the U-2 pilots soaring untouched, thousands of feet above them. The Soviet general staff knew they were being spied upon, and their inability to stop it was a profound source of national shame and frustration. For the U-2 pilots, each mission was a blend of ethereal beauty and profound danger. Flying at the edge of space, they saw the curvature of the Earth, the thin blue line of the atmosphere, and the sprawling, untouched landscapes below. But the beauty was always underscored by the ever-present threat of engine failure, structural disintegration in the thin air, or worst of all, detection. Pilots like Francis Gary Powers became hardened veterans of these lonely, high-altitude forays, acutely aware that a single mechanical failure or a lucky shot could mean the end of their mission and their lives. The stakes were impossibly high. Eisenhower continued to authorize flights, each time with growing reluctance. The intelligence was too vital to stop, but the risk of an international incident grew with every successful sortie. The U-2 was a technological marvel, a strategic necessity, and a political time bomb, all rolled into one sleek, black package. The confidence among American intelligence circles was high. The U-2 seemed truly untouchable. But unbeknownst to them, the Soviets were furiously working on a response, pouring resources into developing new interceptors and, more critically, surface-to-air missile systems that could finally reach the stratosphere. This cat-and-mouse game was rapidly escalating, moving towards an inevitable and dangerous climax. As the U-2 missions continued to penetrate Soviet airspace with impunity, The Soviet Union intensified its efforts to counter the high-flying intruder. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev publicly often dismissed the overflights as a nuisance, but privately, he seethed with rage and humiliation. He understood the immense strategic advantage the US gained from these flights and the psychological blow it delivered to Soviet prestige. Orders were given to Soviet scientists and engineers. Find a way to bring down the U-2, no matter the cost. This directive spurred frantic development in Soviet aviation and missile technology. New interceptor aircraft like the Sukhoi Su-9 and the formidable Mikoyan-G, UREVIC H-2, were pushed into service, designed to climb higher and faster. However, even these advanced fighters still struggled to intercept the U-2 at its operational altitudes. The real breakthrough came in surface-to-air missile technology. The Soviet Union poured massive resources into developing and deploying the S-7 Dvina, known in the West as the SAT-2 guideline. This new missile system, with its impressive ceiling and radar guidance, promised to be the answer to Khrushchev's prayers. The cat and mouse game in the stratosphere grew increasingly tense. U-2 pilots reported more frequent radar detections and occasionally saw interceptors attempting to reach them, sometimes in desperate, near vertical climbs that risked stalling the Soviet jets. There were several near misses, adding to the psychological strain on the U-2 crews. Each mission felt like pushing the envelope further, testing fate. The program had been operating on borrowed time for years, its invulnerability eroding with every Soviet technological advancement. By the spring of 1960, the political landscape was shifting dramatically. A crucial East-West summit was scheduled for mid-May in Paris. It was meant to be a pivotal moment for de-escalation, a chance for Eisenhower and Khrushchev to find common ground and reduce Cold War tensions. The prospects for a diplomatic thaw, however fragile, seemed real. This looming summit placed Eisenhower in an even more agonizing position regarding the U-2 flights. Any incident could torpedo the delicate negotiations. Yet, American intelligence, particularly from the CIA under Richard Bissell, argued for one last crucial flight before the summit. They had identified what they believed to be a critical new intercontinental ballistic missile test site at Plesetsk, deep within the Soviet Union. Confirming the capabilities and scale of this site was paramount to American strategic planning. The missile gap fears, though somewhat assuaged by previous U-2 flights, still loomed large, and definitive photographic evidence from Plesetsk could either confirm or finally debunk the most extreme anxieties. Eisenhower, ever the cautious statesman, wrestled with the decision. He knew the risks. He knew the political implications if a U-2 was shot down. But the need for accurate intelligence to prevent either a nuclear surprise or a ruinous overspending on an unnecessary arms race was a powerful counterweight. He approved the mission, codenamed Operation Grand Slam, with a strict deadline. The flight had to be completed by May 1st, well before the Paris summit. He reportedly told CIA Director Allen Dulles that he wanted no flights after May 1st, essentially giving the program a final, critical window. This decision to authorize one more roll of the dice in the strategic game would prove to be one of the most consequential of the Cold War. The stage was set for a confrontation that would plunge the world into a diplomatic crisis, unraveling years of careful negotiation in a single, catastrophic moment. The pilot chosen for this fateful mission was Francis Gary Powers. Born in Kentucky in 1929, Powers was a soft-spoken, unassuming man with an extraordinary skill set. He had joined the US Air Force in 1950, becoming an F-8 four-fighter pilot. Dissatisfied with the routine of military life, he was recruited by the CIA in 1956 to fly the U-2. The appeal was undeniable: better pay, the allure of clandestine operations, and the extraordinary challenge of piloting a cutting-edge aircraft at the edge of space. Powers was an experienced U-2 veteran, having flown more than 24 missions, some of them over Soviet territory. He understood the risks, the solitude, and the beauty of his unique profession. The mission, Operation Grand Slam, was ambitious in its scope. Powers was to take off from Peshawar, Pakistan, fly north across Afghanistan and the Soviet Central Asian republics, over the Aral Sea, targeting several key military installations, including the suspected ICBM test site at Plesetsk and the industrial city of Sverdlovsk. The flight path alone stretched over 2,900 miles of hostile territory. On the morning of May 1st, 1960, everything seemed to align for the mission. The weather over the Soviet Union was clear, offering ideal conditions for photographic reconnaissance. Powers climbed into the cramped cockpit of U-2, C, tail number 5666693. With a roaring takeoff from Peshawar, he began his ascent. The flight proceeded routinely, Powers reporting in as he crossed various checkpoints. He carefully maneuvered the delicate aircraft, activating the high-resolution cameras that would capture the secrets of the Soviet heartland. For hours, Powers soared in serene isolation. The world below him was a patchwork of snow-capped mountains and vast plains, an alien landscape viewed from an alien height. He passed over the Aral Sea, then began approaching his primary targets. Deep in the Soviet Union, at a location near Dektyarsk in the Sverdlovsk region, the Soviet Air Defense Network, now equipped with the advanced Sat-2 guideline missile system, was on high alert. They had been tracking the U-2 for some time, scrambling every available resource to intercept it. Khrushchev's orders were absolute: bring it down. As Powers flew near Sverdlovsk, his aircraft was detected by multiple Sat-2 missile batteries. The Soviet response was chaotic, desperate, and ultimately effective. A barrage of 14 Sat-2 missiles was launched. Such was the lack of coordination and the urgency of the moment that one Soviet MiG-1 fighter, attempting a desperate intercept, was also inadvertently shot down by its own side, tragically killing its pilot. Powers, high above, first noticed a bright orange flash off his left wing. Then, an incredibly violent concussion rocked the U-2. It wasn't a direct hit, but the proximity of one of the Sat-2 missile warheads, detonating with immense force, was enough. The shockwave tore into the delicate airframe. Powers' aircraft pitched violently, its wings shearing off. The U-2 began an uncontrollable, sickening tumble from 70,000 feet. In the midst of the chaos, Powers struggled to survive. His initial instinct was to activate the aircraft's self-destruct mechanism, a protocol designed to destroy the sophisticated reconnaissance equipment and prevent its capture by the enemy. But the violent centrifugal forces of the spinning plane made it impossible for him to reach the button. He fought to eject, but the ejection seat's armrests, which initiated the sequence, were beyond his grasp as he was thrown around the cockpit. As the plane broke apart, Powers was partially thrown clear, his parachute deploying automatically at a lower altitude. He drifted down into the Soviet Union, injured but alive, leaving behind the shattered remnants of his aircraft. He landed in a field near a village, his pressure suit still mostly intact. Local farmers quickly surrounded him, disoriented but realizing he was a foreign intruder. He was immediately captured by Soviet authorities. The ultimate risk had become reality, and the US spy plane program, once thought inviolable, had been catastrophically compromised. What the Soviets now held in their possession, Powers, the wreckage, and the photographic equipment, would soon unleash a diplomatic firestorm that would shake the foundations of the Cold War. In Washington, a nervous silence descended. Days passed with no contact from Francis Gary Powers. The CIA and the State Department sprang into action, executing a meticulously prepared cover-up plan. On May 3rd, NASA, the civilian space agency, issued a press release claiming that a weather research plane had gone missing over the Turkish-Soviet border area. The story was elaborate. The U-2, described as an unarmed aircraft studying atmospheric conditions, had experienced oxygen system failure and drifted off course. It was a carefully constructed fiction, designed to minimize the political fallout if the plane was merely lost or the pilot rescued. The next day, the story was reiterated and expanded. The US government insisted that there was no deliberate attempt to violate Soviet airspace, and that the weather plane's mission was to collect atmospheric samples. The confidence in the U-2's invulnerability was so deeply ingrained that few in Washington truly believed the Soviets could have recovered anything substantial. The assumption was that the aircraft would have disintegrated completely at such high altitude, or that any wreckage would be too scattered to be useful. This profound miscalculation would soon prove to be one of the greatest intelligence blunders of the Cold War. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev watched patiently with a predatory grin. He knew exactly what had happened. Soviet forces had not only shot down the U-2, but they had recovered substantial portions of the wreckage, including the advanced cameras, the reconnaissance film, and, most damningly, the pilot, Francis Gary Powers, who had confessed his mission. Khrushchev, a master of political theater, decided to play a sophisticated game of cat and mouse. He allowed the Americans to dig themselves deeper into their elaborate lie, letting them confidently deny any espionage activity. Then, on May 7th, Khrushchev dropped his bombshell. In a dramatic address to the Supreme Soviet, he announced not only that an American spy plane had been shot down deep inside Soviet territory, but that its pilot, Francis Gary Powers, was alive and well and had confessed to his mission. To prove his claims, Khrushchev revealed photographs of the recovered U-2 wreckage, complete with its highly specialized photographic equipment, and even showed pieces of the pilot's survival kit. The evidence was irrefutable. The revelation sent shockwaves around the world. For the United States, it was a profound humiliation. President Eisenhower's carefully constructed denial was exposed as a blatant, audacious lie on the international stage. American credibility plummeted, especially among its allies who hosted U-2 bases, some of whom had been explicitly assured that the aircraft were only for weather research. The carefully orchestrated plan to prevent political fallout had backfired spectacularly, turning a single incident into a global crisis. Khrushchev had masterfully trapped the Americans, transforming a military success for the Soviet Union into a devastating diplomatic victory. The world now held its breath, wondering what would come next as the Paris summit, meant to ease tensions, now loomed under the shadow of this catastrophic espionage failure. The immediate casualty of the U-2 incident was the eagerly anticipated Paris summit, scheduled for May 16, 1960. President Eisenhower flew to Paris, hoping against hope to salvage the fragile prospects for a diplomatic thaw. He was joined by British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan and French President Charles de Gaulle, awaiting the arrival of Nikita Khrushchev. The atmosphere was thick with tension, not of negotiation, but of accusation and resentment. Khrushchev arrived not in a conciliatory mood, but with the full force of Soviet outrage. He demanded an immediate and unqualified apology from President Eisenhower for the aggressive act of espionage, a promise to cease all future overflights, and the punishment of those responsible. It was an ultimatum designed to humiliate, a public dressing down of the leader of the free world. Eisenhower, a man of profound integrity and strategic realism, found himself in an impossible position. To apologize would be to admit guilt, to bow to Soviet demands, and to undermine the very intelligence operations he believed were essential for American security. To deny it further was now impossible, given the irrefutable evidence. In a pivotal moment, Eisenhower took an unprecedented step. He publicly admitted that the U-2 flight had been an act of espionage authorized by his administration. He stated that such intelligence gathering was a distasteful but vital necessity for the United States, given the Soviet Union's secrecy and the need to prevent surprise attacks. He explicitly refused to apologize for collecting intelligence, but did promise to suspend future overflights for the remainder of his term. This defiant stance, while maintaining American dignity, was precisely what Khrushchev needed to justify his next move. The Soviet leader denounced Eisenhower's statement as arrogant and refused to participate in the summit. He publicly withdrew the invitation for Eisenhower to visit the Soviet Union, a personal slight of the highest order. The Paris summit, meant to be a turning point for peace, collapsed before it even officially began. The hopes for nuclear disarmament talks, for a reduction in Cold War tensions, and for a personal understanding between the two superpowers were shattered. The global consequences were profound. America's allies, particularly those like Pakistan and Turkey who had hosted U-2 bases, found themselves in a precarious position, facing Soviet threats and accusations of complicity. There was a genuine fear that the incident could escalate into a military confrontation. Domestically, Eisenhower's carefully cultivated image as a calm, truthful leader was tarnished. Critics accused him of incompetence and deception. The international climate became more hostile, the rhetoric sharper, and the prospects for peace dimmer. The U-2 incident had not only brought down a spy plane but had also brought down the fragile bridge of diplomacy. Beyond the immediate diplomatic fallout, the U-2 incident had far-reaching strategic repercussions that fundamentally reshaped the trajectory of the Cold War. Francis Gary Powers became a pawn in the geopolitical game. He was put on public trial in Moscow in August 1960. A carefully orchestrated propaganda spectacle designed to showcase Soviet strength and American duplicity. Powers, looking exhausted and remorseful, confessed to espionage, was convicted, and sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment, including 7 years of hard labor. His fate became a symbol of the dangers of Cold War espionage, and a testament to the human cost of the intelligence struggle. The U-2 incident definitively ended American U-2 overflights of Soviet territory. Eisenhower's promise to suspend them was largely kept, ushering in a new era of intelligence gathering. The reliance on manned overflights, with their inherent political risks, was simply no longer sustainable. The immediate scramble within the US intelligence community was to accelerate the development of alternative, less provocative means of collecting strategic information. This crisis directly spurred the rapid advancement of satellite reconnaissance programs. While already underway, projects like Corona, the United States' first successful photographic reconnaissance satellite program, gained unprecedented urgency and funding. These unmanned spy satellites could orbit the Earth, taking pictures of hostile territory without violating sovereign airspace, thus largely mitigating the political risks associated with manned aircraft. The U-2 incident, paradoxically, forced a crucial technological leap forward, moving intelligence gathering from the dangerous realm of the atmosphere to the relative safety of space. It was a transformation from the era of daring individual pilots to the age of automated, remote surveillance. The U-2, however, did not simply fade away. Despite its initial political failure over the Soviet Union, its remarkable capabilities ensured its continued service. Modified and upgraded, the U-2 would play a crucial, if less publicized, role in subsequent Cold War confrontations. Most notably, in October 1962, U-2 flights over Cuba provided the indisputable photographic evidence of Soviet intermediate-range ballistic missile sites, triggering the Cuban Missile Crisis, arguably the most dangerous moment of the Cold War. Without the U-2's unique ability to gather high-resolution imagery from extreme altitudes, President John F. Kennedy's administration would have been operating in the same fog of uncertainty that Eisenhower had faced just 2 years earlier. Eisenhower's legacy, while initially tarnished by the U-2 scandal, ultimately recovered. He steadfastly maintained that the intelligence gathered by the U-2 was essential for peace, providing him with the accurate information needed to navigate the treacherous waters of the Cold War. He was convinced that without it, the US would have been forced into an even more aggressive and expensive arms race, based on fear rather than fact. His refusal to apologize for gathering intelligence, while politically costly in the short term, underscored his deeply held belief in the necessity of knowing the adversary's true capabilities. For Francis Gary Powers, the ordeal continued until 1962, when he became a central figure in one of the most famous spy exchanges in history. On February 10, 1962, on the Glienicke Bridge connecting West Berlin with Potsdam in East Germany, Powers was exchanged for Soviet KGB Colonel Rudolf Abel, a master spy who had been arrested and imprisoned in the United States. The Bridge of Spies exchange, immortalized in film and literature, closed a painful chapter for Powers and marked a rare moment of direct, if tense, cooperation between the two superpowers. Powers returned home to a mixed reception, facing suspicion and scrutiny, but eventually working to clear his name and share his story. The spy plane that changed the Cold War, the Lockheed U-2 Dragon Lady, was a product of technological ambition, strategic necessity, and political daring. Its brief, audacious forays into Soviet airspace ended in a diplomatic disaster that ripped apart a fragile opportunity for peace. But in its failure, it forced a fundamental transformation in intelligence gathering. The U-2 incident accelerated the shift from high-risk manned overflights to the safer, less provocative, and ultimately more comprehensive realm of satellite reconnaissance, ironically providing the very means to achieve the transparency Eisenhower had desperately sought. The U-2 program, the pilots who flew its lonely missions, and the engineers who pushed the boundaries of aviation were all part of a relentless pursuit of knowledge in a world gripped by fear and suspicion. The incident exposed the immense risks nations were willing to take and the lies they were prepared to tell, to pierce the veil of secrecy. It stands as a stark testament to the complexities of Cold War espionage, where technological triumph could quickly morph into political catastrophe, and where the relentless drive for information could push the world to the brink. Even today, the U-2 Dragon Lady, a testament to its radical and enduring design, continues to fly, a living relic of that intense era. But its most enduring legacy is not just its continued service, but the profound shift it helped usher in. The spy plane that sought to pierce the veil of secrecy ultimately ripped open a diplomatic wound, but in doing so, paradoxically pushed intelligence gathering into a safer, more sustainable future, transforming the Cold War's strategic game forever. It reminds us that in the high-stakes world of geopolitics, the quest for knowledge often comes at an unexpected and transformative price.